Hi everyone. Today we're going to be covering web app compatibility with Enterprise Mode for Internet Explorer and Microsoft Edge. Although it's a very small audience and I love getting very interactive, we are recording this session. So I'd appreciate it if you hold questions until the end. I promise you I'll answer most of your questions throughout the presentation, but I will stay at the end and I'll stay afterwards as long as it takes to answer questions. So if you talk to 12 different consultants, you're likely to get 12 different answers for how a project should go. But generally, there's a phase where you consider the product, you look at what available products there are, and look at the capabilities of those products. There's a phase where you plan and evaluate your current inventory. There's a phase where you test and remediate applications. And there's a phase where you actually deploy and manage the software. Today's session is going to be really focused on testing and remediation, and we want to get as deep as we can. So I'm going to be diving into demos pretty quickly. But I also wanted to give you some background as to why Internet Explorer has such great backward compatibility and some of the features and tools that we have available to help you at each of these phases. So first, talking about consideration. I know this is an eye chart, but it's really helpful to understand where we came from, to understand where we're going. These are the list of possible supported operating systems for different versions of Internet Explorer. Of course, Windows XP had IE 6, 7, and 8. Windows Vista supported IE 7, 8, and 9. Windows 7 supported 4 versions of Internet Explorer, IE 8, 9, 10, and 11. Windows 8 only had IE 10, and Windows 8.1 only supported IE 11. On Windows 10, we have 2 browsers, and I should explain. Internet Explorer 11 is supported primarily for backward compatibility, and we'll go into this in a lot more detail as we go forward. Internet Explorer 11 is the last major version of Internet Explorer, and it will continue to get security updates and technical support for the life of the operating system on which it's installed. So Internet Explorer 11 isn't going away anytime soon, but all of our new development work and all of our new standards work is going into Microsoft Edge, which is a faster, safer browser designed for Windows 10. Now, of course, looking at this chart, it makes sense that many customers standardized on Internet Explorer 8 because it was the only version of Internet Explorer that was available on Windows XP, Windows Vista, and on Windows 7. So as you migrated from Windows XP up to Windows 7, many customers standardized on IE 8 because if you could move to IE 8 on Windows XP, you were essentially doing some of your migration ahead of time. Likewise, if you move to Internet Explorer 11 now, and most of you hopefully already have, but if you've moved to IE 11 already on Windows 7, you've done some of your Windows 10 migration work ahead of time. Now, this is the list of currently supported browsers. As I said a moment ago, Internet Explorer 11 is the last major version of Internet Explorer, but it will continue to get security updates and technical support and occasional minor compatibility fixes where it makes sense. We do support IE 11 on Windows 7, on Windows 8.1, and on Windows 10. Our message to customers about line of business applications is that upgrading your line of business applications to modern web standards obviously makes the most sense. But you can use backward compatibility and continue to use Internet Explorer 11 as long as you need to. To put that differently, you can upgrade your web applications on your own schedule and not on a migration schedule or on Microsoft's schedule. So we continue to support Internet Explorer 11. Now, I should also explain, a moment ago I said that we would occasionally offer minor compatibility fixes where it made sense to do so on IE 11. What I meant by that is, here's an example. Last January, we issued a cumulative security update for Internet Explorer 11, and we found that it broke jQuery for a certain number of customers. So in areas where we may issue a cumulative security update for Internet Explorer 11, and it may break something, we absolutely still want to be able to fix that. So that's what I meant when I said we're offering minor updates for Internet Explorer 11, and of course continuing to offer security and technical support for the life of the operating system on which it's installed. Now, at the same time, where we really want to go is to Microsoft Edge. On Windows 10, Microsoft Edge is a much faster, much safer, much more standards compliant browser. And we have a lot of evidence that's starting to come out that supports that. So I'll share with you just a little bit of our vision for Windows 10 and where we want to take Microsoft Edge and where it is today. Now, I don't have a lot of slides on Microsoft Edge. If you're really interested in a deep dive, I encourage you to go watch my session from Microsoft Ignite, where I did a 75-minute breakout on Microsoft Edge and its compatibility and security and so on. But I did want to share this with you. Just a couple things. One is we did commission Forrester to go out and survey customers and find out from large customers who had already deployed Microsoft Edge what their experience was. Now, frankly, I'm in marketing, although I'm an IT pro. So I love getting surveys of real customers because I can use this in two ways. If it's negative about Microsoft and about our product, I use it as a hammer against engineering to go build a better product. If it's positive for Microsoft, then I get to use it for marketing material. And I'm very pleased to say I commissioned Forrester to go do the survey and said, I want the truth. Go talk to customers who have deployed Microsoft Edge in 500 seats or more, and in some cases they found out more than 100,000 seats, in the US, UK, Germany, and Japan. They found 168 customers and did a very in-depth survey and created an infographic for us that gives the results. You can download this yourself if you go to aka.ms/edge infographic. It's available in, I think, 11 different languages. The net of all this is the experience with Microsoft Edge is relatively positive. I say relatively because there are some trade-offs, and I'll explain those. Over 90% of customers experienced a positive return on their investment for deploying Microsoft Edge. A significant number found that there were fewer successful phishing attacks, there were fewer socially engineered malware attacks. Many customers found that they were more productive using Cortana, and they were more productive having web pages load faster and have a much cleaner look and using Reading View and other features. Now the trade-off is customers who deployed TH2, that is to say the Windows 10 November update from over a year ago, generally had a lesser experience than customers who were deploying Redstone 1, which is to say our Windows 10 anniversary update. Now, if you think about this, it makes sense. Windows 10 November update came over a year ago. Since we released Microsoft Edge as part of Windows 10, we've gone through 3 major updates, and we're coming up on a 4th major update. So many of you are old school Microsoft folks, and I respect that. And I think the old school mantra was you never deploy something until it's at least Service Pack 1 or Service Pack 2. The easiest way to think about Microsoft Edge is it is always up to date, and that's what we're aiming for. But we've been through 3 major revisions so far, and we're coming up on a 4th. So it is a much more mature product than it was even a year ago. If you use the Windows 10 anniversary update, you'll find that you have a much better experience with the product. And of course, if you use Redstone 2 that's coming up, the Windows 10 Creators Update, you'll have an even better experience with Microsoft Edge. Of course, what do I mean by better experience? I mean compatibility with the modern web. We want to make sure that Windows 10 Microsoft Edge is compatible with today's websites and services. And so if you look at html5test.com, if you look at html5accessibility.com, if you look at the Kangax ECMAScript scores, you'll find that we're very competitive with Chrome, with Firefox, with other browsers. So we do have a horse in the game, so to speak now. We do have a very, very successful product. All right, there's another resource that I wanted to point you to, and that's browser security. NSS Labs is an independent security firm that does testing on their own. And then they release these reports periodically about firewall safety, about Windows safety, endpoint protection. One of the things they test is browser security. And specifically, they test phishing sites and the ability to block socially engineered malware. What they found on November 1st of last year, they released 2 reports, one for phishing and one for socially engineered malware, that found that Microsoft Edge not only blocked more phishing sites and more socially engineered malware than Chrome or Firefox, but they also found that Microsoft Edge blocked that more consistently, and it blocked it faster than other browsers. This is just a link to the reports. Microsoft didn't commission NSS Labs to do those reports. This is just a quick link to the NSS Labs page itself. If you go to nsslabs.com/browser-security, you can get a direct link to those reports as well. What we suggest on Windows 10 is that you standardize on Microsoft Edge for a faster, safer browsing experience. And then you can fall back to Internet Explorer 11 just for the sites that need backward compatibility. A couple of the group policies that I'll be showing you, we introduced in the Windows 10 Anniversary Update this past summer. And in the Windows 10 Anniversary Update, we now have the ability to limit the use of Internet Explorer 11 just to the sites that are on your enterprise mode site list. So effectively, what we're giving you is least privileged browsing. We're saying you can standardize on Microsoft Edge and use that as your default browser and fall back to Internet Explorer 11 only for the sites that you've approved. Now, of course, if anyone goes to any other site, it switches right back to Microsoft Edge. And I can anticipate at least one question at this point, and that's, we've had a number of customers approach us and say, this works great, except when are we going to have the ability to keep favorites in sync between the two browsers so my users aren't confused? The good news is that's live in the Windows Insider preview, and it's coming in Redstone 2. So that is a feature and a group policy that we're bringing in the Windows 10 Creators Update to be able to keep Internet Explorer 11 and Microsoft Edge favorites in sync across the two browsers. Now let's go back a little bit to explain document modes. Now, as I said before, I'm an IT pro. I'm not a developer. What little development I did, I think, is covered under the statute of limitations. But you know, I do know something about document modes, having been in the space for 5 years now, and having been in the industry for with almost 30 years, I think. When Microsoft shipped Internet Explorer 5, we included a document mode for IE5 standards. Now, some of these were tried and true internet standards. Some of these were Microsoft proprietary standards. In other words, we included functionality in the browser by customer requests that enabled you to do things in line of business applications, and the web went in a different direction. So if you think about it, 20 years ago, when we first shipped Internet Explorer, there weren't a lot of great web standards. In order to create really compelling web applications, we needed to enable binary controls. So we enabled ActiveX controls, we enabled Java, we enabled Silverlight, and other kind of binary technologies. Those gave web applications the power of your PC. But the web has gone in a different direction now. And so primarily, I think for security reasons, we now have web standards like HTML5, CSS3, WebGL that give you a lot of power, while at the same time, they don't really expose your PC to those binary extensions. So that's the way that modern browsers are working. But if we go back to IE5, IE5 supported a lot of technologies that were proprietary to IE5, a lot of ways of doing things that only worked in IE5. And of course, a little later, we came out with IE6 and then IE7. In IE7, we realized that a lot of applications had been written for IE5 standards. So we created something called a document mode, an IE7 document mode. This included IE5 document mode for those older applications and IE7 document mode for newer applications. Now, this is an important distinction because this is still true today. If a web page doesn't have a valid doc type in the header, it will automatically fall back in Internet Explorer, any version of Internet Explorer, it will fall back to IE5 Quirks mode. And that's an important distinction because this is something that we can control today through enterprise mode, which I'll talk about more in a little bit. Now in IE8, we included IE5 doc mode, IE7 doc mode, IE8 doc mode. If you look at the timeline here, this really explains it. When we came out with IE5, it was 1999. IE8 came out in 2009. There were a lot of line of business applications written in that 10-year period. And many of these line of business applications are still in use today. So when we came out with IE8, we also included something called Compatibility View. Compatibility View is basically a switch. What it does is it puts a web page in IE7 mode if there's a valid doc type on the page, and it falls back to IE5 mode if there's not a valid doc type. There's a lot of confusion about compatibility view, and I want to make it very simple. Compatibility view, even to this day, means you'll either get IE7 dock mode or IE5 dock mode. You can enable this in a variety of ways, but what we recommend today is to use enterprise mode because that gives you the most granularity. Now, of course, there are some group policies. The problem with the group policies is they work at a domain level. So if you set Microsoft.com in compatibility view, that means everything under Microsoft.com is going to show up in either IE5 or IE7 mode. I have a lot of customers who approach me and say, hey, this site works fine or this web app works fine in Chrome. It doesn't work in Internet Explorer. The number one cause of that is that you're forcing Internet Explorer to try to run it in IE7 mode. And of course, it's not going to work. So there are ways of fixing this now, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Of course, IE9 included all of those dock modes, plus IE9, IE10, plus IE10 dock mode. And in IE11, we had these document modes when we first shipped Internet Explorer 11. But some customers came to us and said, you know what? It's great that you have all these document modes, but my web application still doesn't work. You've turned off some things over the years that we needed in IE5 or IE7 or IE8, and those no longer work in IE11. So we worked with 90 customers in a pilot. And in April of 2014, we issued something called Enterprise Mode. Now, Enterprise Mode is higher fidelity emulation for older versions of Internet Explorer. Think of this as a better emulation than the document modes that were built into IE11 when we first shipped it. IE8 Enterprise Mode is basically it's trying as much as possible to emulate Internet Explorer 8. It pretends to be Internet Explorer 8 and tells the website it's Internet Explorer 8. It uses the exact same original user agent string that IE8 did. It even spoofs the version number to ActiveX controls. So if an ActiveX control asks the browser, what version are you, it'll say, as far as you know, I'm IE8, and most of those ActiveX controls will continue to work. I say most because we occasionally run into something squirrely. We had one customer in Japan, for example, who told us they had a custom-written ActiveX control that actually was set to query the operating system and make sure that the operating system was Windows XP. So in cases like that, it's hard for the browser to put a shim there. But in nearly all cases, using IE8 Enterprise Mode, you can get ActiveX controls to work where before they would fail. IE7 Enterprise Mode is essentially IE8 Enterprise Mode running in compatibility view. So it's IE8 emulation running in compatibility view, which will obviously bring you down to either IE7 document mode or IE5 document mode. You can enable these things through enterprise mode, and you can enable enterprise mode through group policy, MDM, or registry key, and I'll show you those methods in a few minutes. So these are the document modes available in IE11 in enterprise mode. I talk to a lot of customers who say, I pulled up my site in Internet Explorer 11, it didn't work, so we just check a regex and we move on. Let me encourage you to think about testing these modes before you dismiss IE11, especially for backward compatibility. If you have a site that works in IE5, IE6, IE7, IE8, IE9, IE10, and doesn't work in IE11, chances are that it's not running in the right document mode. So that's what this session is covering, is how you can assess which document mode is being used today successfully by your application, and how you can use enterprise mode to set the document mode yourself, and how you can get this to work in a Windows 10 environment where you just fall back to IE11 for those sites that need this backward compatibility. So let's move on to planning and evaluation. We have a few different tools that you can use to be able to assess your current environment. I'm assuming that in some way your web application works with some version of Internet Explorer. If you have a problem where you have a web application that works with other modern browsers and doesn't work with Internet Explorer, let's talk offline. Because there are some techniques that you can use. You can use some of these same techniques, but the specific scenario that I'm supporting here is you have an application, it works fine in IE5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and for some reason you can't get it to work in IE11. So this can help you with that scenario. One way you can test this is using the F12 developer tools in IE 8, 9, 10, or 11 and seeing what document mode is being used today by the application. This is a manual effort, but it doesn't require too much work. So there are customers who have trained a few people to go test, and you can build a spreadsheet or build a database of that pretty quickly. Now, a little bit easier is enterprise site discovery. We built some hooks into IE 8, 9, 10, and 11 that are turned off by default. But if you choose to enable them, you can collect information from your machines. And I have a slide later about what's collected. But you can collect information very selectively. You can choose to collect information only about certain sites or your intranets, as opposed to the internet at large. And it will tell you things like what document mode is being used by what page. And then finally, Upgrade Analytics. If you're using Upgrade Analytics today to assess your, let's say, Windows 7 environment to upgrade to Windows 10, there is a way that you can turn on Enterprise Site Discovery telemetry inside Upgrade Analytics and take a look at what your users are doing, what websites they're going to, and what document modes they're using. And of course, we do obfuscate some of that information, so there's still privacy. But I encourage you to check the local privacy laws before enabling Enterprise Site Discovery or Upgrade Analytics to make sure that you're not doing something you shouldn't or collecting information that you shouldn't. And of course, you can scope this, again, just to your intranet sites or just to a certain set of domains. So the F12 developer tools are relatively simple. All we're doing in this context is looking at the emulation tab and looking at what document mode is being used by this site and for what reason. In this case, we can see that the document mode being used is IE7. And it's being used because there's an XUA-compatible meta tag on the site itself. In other words, the web page itself is asking for IE7 document mode. Now, there are customers out there that for years have had, including the XUA-compatible meta tag for IE8 as part of their developer standards. So I've talked to many large customers who say, we're creating new web pages that work fine in other modern browsers and they don't work in Internet Explorer. This could be a reason, because the developers themselves have hard-coded the site to ask for IE7 document mode. Now, the good news is enterprise mode overrides what the site itself is asking for. So even if a site has an XUA-compatible meta tag on the site saying, I want to be in IE7 document mode, enterprise mode has the ability to override that. It essentially gives more control back to the IT pros like myself, as opposed to the developers who may have, 5 years ago, they may have asked for IE8 document mode when it made sense, but it no longer makes sense in today's environment. Enterprise Site Discovery I mentioned. These are hooks that are, again, turned off by default, available in IE8, 9, 10, and 11. You can collect information, collect it via WMI or XML. If you're using System Center Configuration Manager, there's a toolkit you can download that contains some sample queries. So you can gather information from the machines themselves, collect it in SCCM, and then display that. Or you can collect it using whatever tool you like. If you output to XML, you can pull it into a spreadsheet, whatever's easiest for you. This is the information that Enterprise Site Discovery actually collects. You'll see on most versions of Internet Explorer, we collect the document code, the document reason, even hangs or crashes associated with the site. So if users tell you, well, the site works fine in IE8 or IE9, you may be able to tell them, well, it only works half the time. It does crash sometimes, even in your native environment. If you're interested in more information about Enterprise Site Discovery, we do have a lot of information on TechNet, and do a search on Enterprise Site Discovery Toolkit for a downloadable toolkit that contains some sample PowerShell scripts and some SCCM sample queries. And of course, you can also plug this into Upgrade Analytics, as I mentioned before. This can gather information about what sites are being visited and what document modes those sites are being rendered in. I do want to emphasize one thing about the last two methods, though, Enterprise Site Discovery and Upgrade Analytics, and that's that this is really, it's not a web crawler. So this is a way of creating a data-driven picture of your web environment, but it may not be holistic. In other words, I did a lot of ERP deployments in the 90s. And I know from working with accountants that sometimes they had functions that they only ran once a year for year end or once a quarter for quarter end. So if you're using this kind of tool to gather information from your users about what applications are being used when, that may not necessarily indicate the importance of some applications, and you may miss some web applications entirely. On the plus side, having a better data-driven picture of your web environment can help you. For example, even within Microsoft, we found that there was an application that a lot of the engineering team that was using that was actually hosted under somebody's desk. So this can help IT kind of corral those kind of applications and figure out what really belongs in the cloud, what should have much better data redundancy or data support. So if that workstation under a desk goes down, you're not killing your productivity. All right, next let's talk about testing and remediation. This is where we're going to dive into some demos. I mentioned before, you can use the F12 developer tools not only to assess your environment, but also in IE11 to test the modes that an application can use. It's our recommendation that you test using IE11 document mode, and then IE10 document mode, and so on down the list, and then fall back to IE8 enterprise mode or IE7 enterprise mode. And that's for a couple of reasons. One is performance. There is going to be a little bit of a hit running in enterprise mode because, of course, you're running in a much higher fidelity emulation for IE8. So it still is going to run much faster than IE8. Remember, IE8 didn't have any hardware acceleration whatsoever. So in IE11, running in enterprise mode, you're still going to be an order of magnitude faster than running in IE8 natively. I ran SunSpider myself, just out of curiosity, and on my own tests, I found that IE8 ran SunSpider on my test machine in about 8 seconds. In IE11 enterprise mode, it ran in about 800 milliseconds. And running natively in IE11 document mode, it ran in less than 200 milliseconds. So that gives you an idea of the scale. Now, if all of the regular document modes fail, you test enterprise mode by changing the browser profile. And I'll show you how to do this in a second. And then you have available within that enterprise mode IE8, IE7, and IE5 document modes, just as you would if you were running IE8. Once you know which sites run in which document modes, then you can create an enterprise mode site list. Now, there is a tool that we use for creating this today called the Enterprise Mode Site List Manager, and I'll show you that tool. We're also working on a web portal that will make it much easier, and I have some screenshots of that web portal to show you. This is a little bit easier, by the way, than the original schema that we came out with in 2014. This new schema is supported by IE11. If you've taken the cumulative security updates from last June 2016, or later, then your environment can use this new V2 schema. And the V2 schema basically uses a site tag. Within a site, you can choose a compatibility mode and which browser to open it in. So you can specify Microsoft Edge, you can specify IE11, and this is a much more extensible system. So down the road, we may add other functions into this because the schema is much more easily extensible. I did update this slide a little bit from when I presented a similar session in Microsoft Ignite. This is a one-stop cheat sheet for all of the group policies and registry keys associated with Internet Explorer 11 and Microsoft Edge. So obviously this is for Windows 7 IE11, Windows 8.1, or Windows 10 for either browser. And the slides are available online, or you're welcome to take a picture. I'll walk you through this, though, in a lot more detail right now. Whenever I do demos, I like to explain my environment. There's no smoke or mirrors here. I'm simply running a Windows 7 Service Pack 1 machine, a VM, and I'm also running a Windows 10 Anniversary Update machine, so Redstone 1 machine. And I'm going to switch over to those right now. Let's start on Windows 7, and I'll go full screen, make it a little bit easier. All right, so, oh, that's all right. So in this environment, if I pull up Internet Explorer and I type in I set up a localhost machine that has some IE7, IE5 era applications. So think of these as your own applications. And in this case, I pulled up an application, and you'll notice that something's wrong. The buttons seem to be in the upper left corner. There was a web standard back around IE5, IE6, IE7, IE8 called CSS Expressions. Now again, I'm not a developer, but CSS Expressions was a way of putting things in a static location on the page. So of course, a lot of developers use CSS Expressions for things like buttons. If you pull up a website and immediately everything is in the upper left corner, this is a drop-dead giveaway that probably they're using CSS Expressions, because CSS Expressions was not adopted as a W3C standard, so we dropped it in IE9. So if you are trying to run this site in IE11 and everything appears in the upper left-hand corner, it's because IE11 doesn't know where to put those objects. Now, if I'm troubleshooting these, I would go into the F12 developer tools, into the emulation tab, and I would change the document mode. Now, this is a little bit of a misnomer, because for years we've called the latest document mode to that browser Edge. So it's a little bit confusing. But Edge, in this context, is IE11 document mode. It has nothing to do with Microsoft Edge, the browser. In this context, IE11 document mode is this, which is the default. We can try switching back to IE10. Still doesn't work. We can try switching back to IE9. Still doesn't work. And so on. And if we get all the way through this and find that none of these document modes work, that's when we try enterprise mode. That's when we try the higher fidelity emulation of IE8. And the way you go about trying this is by switching the browser profile. Let me scroll down a little bit so you can see the whole dialog box. Changing the browser profile to enterprise. Now, we don't have an enterprise here, so it's a bit of a trick question. By default, enterprise mode is turned off. So this is where we get a little more technical and we start diving into registry keys and so on. And I'm going to pull up gpedit.msc because I want to show you where this is. If I'm looking at group policy, I would go into administrative templates, Windows components, Internet Explorer, and I'm going to change this to standard just so we can see more of the window here. Remember, right now, we're just troubleshooting compatibility. We're not setting the enterprise mode site list yet. We're just troubleshooting compatibility. And there are a couple of settings here. One is let users turn on and use enterprise mode from the tools menu. You need to enable this if you want to be able to see enterprise as a browser profile option. In other words, just for testing, you need to enable this for your testers to be able to turn on enterprise mode. The other group policy that we'll look at in a little bit later is use the enterprise mode IE website list. This is the actual pointer to where the list resides. So let's go ahead and turn this one on. I'm going to enable it. OK. And of course, I can now do GP update force. The alternative method is I can create a registry key. And I want to show you that as well while this is running. So the registry key, I'm going to look at HKLM, software, policies. And this is tricky because some people call me and say, hey, I couldn't find the reg key. It's under policies, not software. And then Microsoft, Internet Explorer, main. And now we have these keys now, but I wanted to show you, if for some reason enterprise mode doesn't exist, you can simply create it. Simply create the enterprise mode key and then create enable that's just a simple regular string. So if the enable string exists, now when I start up, and I do have to restart my browser here. So I'm going to restart Internet Explorer. We'll go back to our page. And I'm going to go to localhost PO, hit F12. now we should see Enterprise as an option under Desktop Profiles. So now if I choose Enterprise, we got our buttons back. Our buttons are now in the right place on the page. You'll notice this is CSS expressions. If I close out the F12 developer tools and scroll, the buttons stay in the same static location on the page. But now that I've got everything running, I see that the document mode is actually 5 that's working. Now this is interesting because I could either use IE8 Enterprise mode or I could use IE7 Enterprise mode because apparently this page doesn't have a valid doc type anyway, so it doesn't matter. I could use either of those doc types because it's going to fall back to IE5 document mode either way. It doesn't really matter. All right, so now I know which document mode to use for this particular site. And I can close this out. And let's go ahead and run the Enterprise Mode Site List Manager to create an Enterprise Mode site list. Now I'm going to cheat a little bit by running this as administrator. You don't ordinarily need to do this. Actually, that's OK. All right, what I'm going to do here is add localhost. Actually, I don't have it there, so I need to add it. Now this is a very simple tool with some caveats. The tool here basically lets me enter in a URL, and I can enter in any string. It can be a web path, it can be a domain, or it can be a longer web path. In this case, I'm just going to enter localhost, and I'm going to say to use IE8 Enterprise mode. These are my options. These should be familiar to you by now. IE11 Enterprise document mode, IE10, all the way through IE5, and then we have our higher fidelity emulation. There's also defaults. If you simply wanted to switch browsers, you can leave it in defaults. If you want to use the Enterprise Mode site list to actually just switch browsers and not change the document mode. In this case, we're going to use IE8 document mode, and I can tell it which browser to open in. This is available whether you're using Windows 7 Enterprise Mode Site List Manager or on Windows 8.1 or on Windows 10, because of course, as you move to a Windows 10 environment, we'd like for you to start doing some of that work ahead of time. And if you're already using the Enterprise Mode Site List in a Windows 7 environment, like I said, you've already done part of your migration. So I'm going to say to open in IE11, we'll save this. It'll validate it. By the way, this tool is good and bad. The good news about this tool is it will keep you from stepping on yourself. It will create valid XML. It will automatically test a link. So if you're actually sending it a link that forwards to a different link, it will find that and it will suggest that you include both links. The downside of this tool is it's really designed for a single user. So I talk to a lot of customers who have large web environments, and they may have multiple people getting in and using this tool at the same time. That's why we're working on the web portal, which I'll close the talk with at the end. The web portal is more of a self-service portal. Line of business application owners can submit requests. You can approve them, and you can publish to publish to production, or you can publish to testing. So there's a lot of flexibility with that tool. This one obviously has some limitations. But that said, I can go ahead and save to XML. I know that it's going to create a site list that's pretty valid. And now that I've saved that, let's go ahead and copy it over. Again, I'm just using, in this case, I'm using my local IIS. So I'm going to copy the site list and paste it into C, inetpub, root, and it will prompt me for administrative permissions in a second. There we go. OK, so I've replaced the site list. Now, just to make sure that we can see it, I'm going to pull the site list up here. Localhost sitelist.xml. This is the XML file that we just created. So this is the file that includes the sites. So there's a little bit of metadata here. Who created the list? When was it created? What version is it? What is the site URL? What is the mode that we're opening in? And what is the browser that we're opening in? So it's fairly straightforward. All right, now let's go ahead and create the group policy that points it to the list. So I'm going to use the Enterprise Mode site list, enable this, and point it to localhost sitelist.xml. And then click the OK button. All right, and I'll go ahead and do another GP update for us. Now, just as a best practice, you can put this enterprise mode site list on a DFS share. You can put it locally on the machine. You can put it on an intranet or extranet site. We do recommend that you put it on a website, and let me explain why. When we go out and pull down the site list for the first time, Internet Explorer and Enterprise Mode, and Microsoft Edge for that matter, will actually create a locally cached copy of that list. So it's going to continue to use that locally cached copy, although when you start Internet Explorer for the first time, after you have a locally cached copy, it's going to again check and see if there's a later version of the Enterprise Mode site list available and pull that one down. If it fails, it will fail silently. So the user never sees a warning, they never see anything. But if you're sharing this file on a DFS share or you're sharing it on a network share, it has to pull down the entire file before it does a comparison of the version numbers. If the version numbers are different, it will try to incorporate the new file. The reason we suggest sharing it on a web share is simply that it will just pull down the header to the file, the first few lines, and compare the version number without having to pull down the entire file. Now, I realize in many environments this is irrelevant. If you just have a few hundred entries, it may not matter to you. But for customers who have thousands of entries, it's a little more efficient for their network to share it as on an intranet site or an extranet site that's available to their clients, so that when the client machine hits it, they're just pulling down the first few lines of the header to see if there's a different version number. And by the way, I should also mention the version number doesn't matter. It's only looking for it to be different. So if you have locally cached version 2 of your enterprise mode site list, and you have version 1 being hosted somewhere, it's going to pull down version 1 and override the locally hosted version. All right, so let's look at a couple things here. One is, if I hit refresh on this screen now, we should see another registry key. Yep. So we have site list, localhost site list. So we know that the group policy was implemented correctly. We also can double check this, and I wanted to give you a little more detail here. If I go into HKey current user and go into software, Microsoft, Internet Explorer, main, enterprise mode, watch what happens. There's not a key there right now. If I start up Internet Explorer, remember, it knows to go look for a site list. It pulls down the site list, and then it updates current version 1. Normally, Internet Explorer will now, if I close down Internet Explorer now and I restart it, it will actually wait 65 seconds before checking for a new site list. So when you're doing some troubleshooting, I wanted to make you aware of that. You have a couple choices. You can either wait 65 seconds, and the reason for that is we still have customers who are using VPNs. We still have customers who are using dial-up. We had numerous customer requests. Please let Internet Explorer wait before checking for the presence of that site list because we have to establish a connection to our home server. So we do that. We wait 65 seconds. If you're doing troubleshooting and you don't want to wait the 65 seconds, one way to cheat is to write a little script that will delete this current version key. If the current version key doesn't exist, Internet Explorer will check immediately for that list. So it'll save you minutes. All right, now, Internet Explorer should be using this site list. So now if I type in localhost PO, we're now using enterprise mode. So we've just enabled enterprise mode for my IE11 environment using the settings that we were able to establish using the F12 developer tools. And we can continue this. We lather, rinse, repeat. We take the next application that's having problems. We find a document mode that works. We add it to the enterprise mode site list, publish it out to production after testing. And once it's published to production, the users shouldn't have to know anything. They shouldn't have to do anything. They're just automatically put into the right mode that works for the web application. So within Internet Explorer, hopefully users aren't going to be stepping on themselves. You're forcing the right document mode. And again, whatever document mode you set in enterprise mode, is going to override what the site itself is asking for. So even if the site itself has hard-coded to ask for XUA compatible IE7, if you tell it to run an IE8 or you tell it to run an IE9 or IE10, it's going to run in that document mode. All right. Any questions about the Windows 7 environment? I am going to switch over to my... I'm switching over now to my... well, let's see if I can get it here. All right, Michael, it got me. How do I switch out of a full screen VM? No, I think it's Windows Shift Escape. All right, anyway. I can always shut it down. All right, we're going to cheat here. I'm going to just shut down my Windows 7 VM. All right, so I'm going to switch over to my Windows 10 VM. There's a way of doing this, and it's a, there we go. Okay, so now I am going to pull up my Windows 10 VM and go full screen. And let's, just to satisfy, Control-Alt-Break. If this happens to you, Control-Alt-Break apparently is what I needed to hit. All right. Okay. So on Windows 10, we're using the same registry keys that we used and the same policies that we used for IE11 on Windows 7. There is one difference, and I wanted to point this out to you before we dive in. If I go into GPEdit, and again, I'm going into the administrative templates, Windows components, and we'll check Internet Explorer first. So these are the same group policies that we had on IE11 for Windows 7. There's one exception. I already have enabled, let users turn on and use enterprise mode. I've enabled use the enterprise mode IE website list. And as a best practice, I should mention, you can set this to the same exact location. So on Windows 10, whether you're using Microsoft Edge or IE11, you can point it to the same enterprise mode site list that you've already been using on Windows 7. Even if you're using the V1 schema, whether it's V1 or V2 schema, you can still point this to the same enterprise mode site list. But we do have one group policy that's different in this context, and that's send all sites not included in the enterprise mode site list to Microsoft Edge. This is a policy we added as part of the Windows 10 anniversary update. I have lots of customers say, OK, I know you showed this on stage, but where do I find it? It's a little tricky because this is in the Internet Explorer section. It's not in the Microsoft Edge section of group policy. So if I enable this, and it's already enabled here, but if I enable this, what this means is I can only use Internet Explorer 11 for sites that are on my enterprise mode site list. Any other site that I go to, whether it's a favorite or whether I just type it into the address bar, I will automatically be switched back to Microsoft Edge for a safer, faster browser experience. So, and in Microsoft Edge, I'll show you the other policy that's relevant here. You do have to point Microsoft Edge to the site list. So there are two site list pointers. One is from IE11, one is coming from Microsoft Edge. And if I go to configure the enterprise mode site list, again, as a best practice, I can point this to the same exact location that I use for my IE11 policy. All right, so once I have those policies in place, this is what the experience should look like for a user. For a user, I have my Microsoft Edge icon here. If I go to a site that requires Internet Explorer 11, and in this case I've added it to my favorites bar, I click on PO requisition, it switches me to Internet Explorer 11 automatically. Another feature that we brought in the Windows 10 anniversary update is there's no interstitial page by default. Some of you may have seen, we used to have a policy so that in Microsoft Edge, you would see a page that said, your administrator has configured this site to open in Internet Explorer 11. By the end of the day, you may have had 30 or 40 of those tabs open. So it was a very frustrating experience for some users. We turn that off by default now, although the policy still exists. And we do have a few customers who say they want to put the pressure on the line of business owners to upgrade their applications so they work within Microsoft Edge. So it's completely up to you. The default behavior now is there's no interstitial page whatsoever. Now, once I finish doing my work within Internet Explorer, now if I type in any other page, let's go to TechNet here. If I type in TechNet and hit enter, it's going to continue my browsing session within Microsoft Edge. Now, I don't want to get across the idea here that IE11 is not secure. But the fact is, because we're running it in 32-bit mode, because we're running generally with ActiveX controls, we're running it outside of App Container. App Container is a feature in Windows 8 and higher that really provides more of a sandbox for your browsing environment. But the bad news is App Container is not compatible with most ActiveX controls. It's not compatible with all but the latest couple of versions of Java. It's not compatible with all but the latest version of Silverlight. So you can configure Internet Explorer 11 to run much more securely. You can configure to run IE11 in 64-bit mode. You can configure it to run within App Container using something called enhanced protected mode. But the fact is, if you do that, you're going to break compatibility. So the easiest way to think about this, and what I would encourage you to tell your users, is Microsoft Edge is the safer, faster browser, and we're falling back to IE11 for compatibility. That's why we want to continue to support IE11 for the life of Windows 7, Windows 8.1, and Windows 10 for that backward compatibility. Now, over time, today, Internet Explorer 11 still has pretty good support for HTML5, although Microsoft Edge has much better support for modern standards. But I think over time, more and more people will just use Internet Explorer 11 just for backward compatibility with their line of business applications. And that's really what the role that it's being relegated to over time. All right, there's just a couple other things I wanted to share with you here. If I type in about:compat, and this works whether I'm in IE11, any version, Windows 7, Windows 8.1, or Windows 10, or it works in Microsoft Edge. But about:compat shows me a couple things. It shows me the Microsoft-hosted compatibility view list, and it also shows me the enterprise mode site list. Now, the Microsoft-hosted list we should talk about for a second. For years, there have been some sites out there that ran better if they were in IE8 document mode or IE9 document mode, a specific document mode, public websites. So we have a list that Microsoft hosts of websites that run best in certain modes. Today, the list on Microsoft Edge of the list of sites that require ActiveX or require Internet Explorer for some reason are fewer than 2,000 sites worldwide. But there are still some sites out there, for example, in Korea and in Brazil, that require ActiveX as part of their PKI, as part of their public key infrastructure. So there are still some sites out there that ask for IE11. Now, if I'm encountering one of those sites in Microsoft Edge that's on this compatibility view list, I still will get prompted. We don't want to automatically switch the user from a safer, faster browser over to a less safe browser automatically. So if I encounter a site that's on this list, and I will be prompted, and it will say, this site runs best in Internet Explorer. Do you want to launch Internet Explorer? And the user will be prompted every time. We don't want to automatically launch a site unless you've approved it and added to your enterprise mode site list. Now, all of that said, you can turn off the compatibility view list. There is a group policy for that. We encourage you to leave it on for compatibility's sake. But if we just look at the enterprise mode site list, this will show you exactly what the browser thinks is part of its enterprise mode site list. So you can either look at the current version registry key, or you can look at this. And yes, we are adding the current version number to this page. I think this is coming in RS2. So we've already had the request to add the version of the enterprise mode site list that this browser is using right onto this page to make it a little bit easier for you to troubleshoot. In other words, if somebody calls and says, hey, this application isn't running, and you quickly figure out it doesn't seem to be running in the right mode, or it's not switching over to Internet Explorer 11 properly, this can help you troubleshoot. It's about:/compat. Now, another question that I always get is, if I'm running in Microsoft Edge, and I encounter a page that's on this localhost, let's say I'm troubleshooting localhost travel, well, I'm going to switch automatically over to IE11 because, again, I added localhost. I added the parent domain. So everything below that domain is going to be switched over to IE11. But wait, I want to try it. I want to troubleshoot it within Microsoft Edge. How do I do that without having to make a request from my group policy folks? Well, the good news is, if I switch back over to Microsoft Edge, I can type about:/flags. About flags includes some developer flags, including use the enterprise mode site list. So I can deselect that. And then I have the ability to go to localhost, let's say travel, and troubleshoot it here. And make sure, try to see if I can get it to work within Microsoft Edge. And yes, before you ask, there is a group policy for Microsoft Edge to disable about flags. So you can choose who has the ability to enable or disable these experimental functions. But this is something that I do occasionally. I step on myself. I will disable the enterprise mode site list for myself, and then I wonder, of course, why it's not working. So I wanted to mention it to you because if you start using this feature, this is something that might happen to you as well. All right. That was the experience that I wanted to show, so I'm going to switch back to my slides now. But I will take questions at the end, or stay after, and we can try some things in the VMs if you want to. So I've just shown you how to test and remediate applications within Internet Explorer 11 and Microsoft Edge using the enterprise mode site list. Now let's talk about deployment and management. Now, of course, Microsoft Edge is a part of Windows 10. We recommend that you don't disable Microsoft Edge or the Edge HTML engine because the Edge HTML engine is responsible for not just rendering web pages for Microsoft Edge, the browser, but it's also responsible for rendering any HTML or JavaScript for universal Windows apps. So if you have store apps like calendar or weather, these may render HTML content, and they require the Edge HTML engine to run. So think of the Edge HTML engine as being part of the operating system, much as the Trident engine was for Internet Explorer. And Edge, the browser, Microsoft Edge, the browser, is more like an application, a wrapper that goes around that platform engine. Microsoft Edge, the engine, Edge HTML, will continue to get updates through Windows Update. So just as you do today, you'll have the ability to test these updates before deploying. I think this is important for compatibility's sake. Just as you do today with Internet Explorer 11 updates, you have the ability to test an update and make sure it works in your environment before you deploy it to your users. Microsoft Edge, the browser, that is to say the shell and the navigation controls that surround the Edge engine, will eventually be updated through the Microsoft Store. And so we look forward to being able to offer much more frequent feature updates. And when I say feature updates, I mean things like Cortana integration, things like reading view, things like PDF functionality. Nothing that would break compatibility with a web application. What we really want to do, sorry, I misspoke, the PDF functionality would be part of the platform. What we're really talking about is updates to the Microsoft Edge application, not updates to the engine that would come through the store. No, IE11, no change. IE11 will continue to get updates through Windows Update for the application and for the underlying web engine, ms.html.dll. The Enterprise Mode Site List Manager I talked about earlier, there are some advantages to this. It'll create error-free XML code. The disadvantages, the biggest one is that it's really designed for a single user. So if you have two people editing the list at the same time, one person might step on the other person. Generally, companies that use this tool have either worked out a process to avoid that, or in some cases, they've looked at the XML schema and they've created their own tools for managing this process. Now, MSIT similarly created their own tool for managing this process and enabling line of business application owners to be able to submit their own requests to say, I own this HR application. This HR application should be in this document mode. And so we've created this tool, and we do plan on releasing this through open source on GitHub. Engineering is working on the string changes right now and making sure that it has a good look and feel and everything for users. So we're making sure that it has a really good state before we publish it to open source. But you'll have the ability to manage approvals and decide which ones you want to approve, which ones you want to test, and then what you publish to production. So this is, think of it as a much more robust enterprise mode site list manager. We're talking about the naming conventions right now. It's likely to be named something like the enterprise mode site list portal, something along those lines. And this should be available hopefully within the next few months. So our final guidance is that Microsoft Edge is a faster, safer browser designed for Windows 10. We suggest that you standardize on Microsoft Edge and fall back to IE11 just for the sites that need backward compatibility. Of course, upgrading to modern apps to modern standards is the best long-term solution, but you can continue to use backward compatibility and upgrade on your own schedules. Some additional resources that we wanted to share. The Edge infographic is at aka.ms/edgeinfographic. The Microsoft Edge Developer Center, the Tech Center. There's a dev blog that talks about recent updates. And there will be a series of security blogs coming out over the next few weeks that talk about some of the security improvements we've made in Microsoft Edge. You may have seen there was an end-of-year Windows wrap-up report from ESET. And an ESET researcher, again confirmed that Microsoft Edge is making great security strides by saying that they hadn't seen any in-the-wild exploits of Microsoft Edge. And we know that some of the features that we're coming out with in RS2, in the Windows 10 Creators Update, will make some of those exploits even more difficult. So we're continuing to combat entire classes of attacks, like heap spraying attacks, use after free attacks, remote code execution, elevation of privilege, and so on. So we're really targeting entire classes and not just specific mitigations for specific attacks. So expect to hear more about that in the blog over the coming couple of months. All right, please join the Microsoft Tech community. And then finally, there will be a Microsoft Experts reception tonight in Hall D1. Well, let me go ahead and take any questions. We do have about 10 minutes left, and I want to make sure I address all of your questions. So, anyone? I apologize, I can't see the audience, but hopefully I addressed most of your questions throughout the presentation. All right, I'll stay in case there are any additional ones, but thank you very much for your time. Thank you. That's a great question. So, it's well, it's IE11. So they got up to that. They got up to that. They got up to that. So the short, I'll give you the longer answer now. In August 2014, we announced that starting January 12, 2016, we were going to be deprecating support for older versions of IE. Of course, we don't get telemetry from most large customers. So we asked our ATSs and TAMs and to go out and talk to customers and see what they're actually using. About 18 months ago, we found out that 25% were on IE11, about 25% were on IE. I mean, there were 4 versions. Do the math, right? The good news is, by the time we hit January 12th, it was over 80% had upgraded to IE11. And as of we asked them to stop tracking it, frankly, last quarter. But the last number I had from the end of September suggests that almost 90% of EPG PCs, of enterprise PCs, had been successfully upgraded to IE11. Not enterprise. It's interesting because this is primarily an enterprise problem. We have been pushing IE9, IE10, IE11 out through Windows Update automatically. So smaller customers that don't host their own web applications have just been taking the updates automatically. So we did have telemetry from consumers that suggested 97+% of consumer devices outside of a couple locales like China for different reasons. But most consumer devices worldwide had taken the upgrade to IE11 successfully. If you think about this problem, it really was focused on the top enterprise customers who were hosting their own line of business applications and couldn't upgrade to later versions of IE because they had those dependencies. And there's some SMB, obviously. I did a lot of mid-market work with manufacturing customers. And most of those manufacturing customers also hosted their own line of business applications. But I think the larger the company, the more likely they were to have this problem.
When you guys announced the end of support for previous versions of IE, that really lit a fire, at least at my company, for that. Because for that, trying to get a unit to say, hey, you have to upgrade your product, trying to get somebody to upgrade people tools.
Right.
Because we want to use a later browser.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah.
And Microsoft's saying, okay, no more security updates for IE9. Then all of a sudden, it's like our compliance area is saying, all right, you guys all have to upgrade your enterprise applications so that you can use a security browser.
Yeah. I don't ever want to suggest that was easy because I know it was a huge pain in the neck, but we had many customers who told us that upgrading from these older versions to IE11 was easier than their old upgrades. I had a guy down the street from us, a large company in Washington, who said, I was hoping to retire before I had to upgrade Internet Explorer again. But once we got through the IE11 migration, he came to me again and said, okay, it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. So I don't want to make light of it because I've been there, done that.
But it was not as much work as we thought it would be.
Okay, good. Because that's I think where most folks netted out.
It was. I could just drop the JRE.
I'll tell you, the enterprise site discovery, I've been told by some customers that they found like 10 different versions of JRE through enterprise site discovery because it'll tell you the GUID.
Nessus already tells me I have to.
Yeah. But yeah, for security reasons, some of these companies are saying, look, we're trying to get it down to like 4, from 12. All right. Hey, really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming.
Thanks a lot. This is really good.
Oh, good. Thank you.